First panel, California's National and International Climate Leadership, moderated by Michael Northrop, Program Director of Sustainable Development at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund.
Good morning. Welcome to the day's first panel. I'm Michael Northrop, and we've got a fantastic panel here, including State Senator Henry Stern, who's the chair of the Natural Resources and Water Committee in Sacramento, Angelina Galiteva, who's the chair of the California ISO Board of Governors, Dr. Manuel, the director of the USC Equity Research Institute, and David Wilhelm, the chief executive officer of Hecate Global Energy. Thank you. That's great. I hope everybody is visible. Terrific. The wonder of Zoom. It's incredible how we've all gotten so used to this and seem to be doing okay. But welcome. It's great to be here with you all. This day, as everybody can see from the agenda, is long and deep, and there's just a tremendous amount of substance. And we're going to start the day with a panel on California in particular, and its leadership and how it's doing and where it needs to go. The frame that we start with is a great one, actually. It's that California has led for so long that there are folks out there that are even going further faster than California is now. Look at the Biden administration's recent commitment to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. There are others like that too that are out there. Science says that may not be enough. It probably isn't enough if we're going to get to a 1.5 degree world, which is what scientists say is what we need to avoid warming above that level if we're going to have a habitable planet. So, oddly, California is in this position of having leapfrogged ahead of everybody, now needing to leapfrog ahead of a couple of other folks and set the bar for what we all need to do. And that's been the role that California has played for so long. It's an incredibly important role. So we're starting to think about what can California do now to really set those goals, commitments, ambitions that will really lead the world to a place where scientists say we need to go. We're going to jump right into it. I want to start with Senator Henry Stern and just ask, Senator, we've got a short amount of time on this panel, and you know so much about this issue, having been a leader on it for so long. What are the, in the 2 minutes that we're going to use to kick off remarks here, what are the two things that California could really do to set the ambition level higher for the rest of the world and for the state?
Thank you, Michael. And thanks to LABC for having me on this illustrious panel. Tough act to follow from Senator Padilla. I guess my answer is 2 words: accelerate and share. We should be doubling down on our climate emissions targets, and the fact that we're, sometimes in California, I helped write AB 32 and SB 32 and set our standards at 40% below 1990 by 2030, and it felt like a big deal at the time. And it was.
It was.
But we should be honest on this panel about California leadership and admit that, we're the 3rd largest consumer of petroleum on the planet. Besides US, China, there's no other nation on the planet that consumes more petroleum than California. So our goals are big, but our impact is bigger. So we actually have to step that up. I think we should be at an 80% by 2030 target, frankly, as a state. I think we should be doubling our emissions trajectory. And I think our carbon market is soft at best, anemic at worst, and it's hurting the most vulnerable communities. So that's the acceleration piece of it. That's also about accelerating spending, though. I think we should be doubling our climate emissions targets, but I think we should be quadrupling our investment. We should be spending $100 billion, in my view, as a state over the next decade. This year in the budget, we've got about $12 billion, which is the largest ever commitment on climate change. But if we're actually going to transform this petro economy into something different and share, I think we've got to do something at scale that the whole global market will say, this is the place to do business if you want to be part of the climate economy. So that's the first piece. And the second is, when I say share, to get over this exceptionalism about California, to not see ourselves as better or different than or an island, but really as a part of this country and as a part of the Western grid, as a part of the international fuel market, to see our economy as integrated, that the goods that move through our system are the goods that reach the middle of this country. There's the pollution that comes from our state becomes others' pollution. So to get past that sort of narrative of exceptionalism and to really start to think about how to integrate with other states and really push that bottom-up strategy that I think is going to help resolve some of the politics in this country too.
Good. Henry, that's fantastic. Thank you. 80 by 2030. I like it.
That's SB 582 as well. That bill is pending on the Senate floor. So it's a real thing.
Great. Fantastic. Senator, one follow-up. California has played this extraordinary role as a government in the multilateral process. Arnold Schwarzenegger did a lot on this, really helped set the tone. Jerry Brown was extraordinary. Just, my God, I watched him at COPs, 9 to 5, meeting after meeting after meeting for a week, really telling everybody to move further, faster. What's California's role now? How does California continue to cheerlead and encourage and support multilateral action in the next period of time, especially as we're kind of coming close to this COP26 moment at the end of the year in Glasgow, which is the next big meeting after Paris, which was in 2015?
I think Governor Newsom's got a harder job even than Schwarzenegger or Brown had. In the background here is the burn scar of Woolsey that burned my whole hometown down and my place down, and to actually deal with the realities of climate head on like this has been a challenge where you got to go inward, right? You don't have to have time necessarily to think about an under 2 MOU or global conversations, but we got to do both at the same time. And I think it's this time around for the lead up to Glasgow, it's about showing, not telling. I think it's about actually doing the work. Can we get through a wildfire season with, aggressive power demands and keep the lights on and do it cleaner and run the grid as clean as we can? And can we actually start delivering these electric vehicles and just really demonstrating it? The biodiversity piece of Glasgow is going to be huge, and we've got our 30 by 30 plan, but let's go execute. So I think it's this time, it's showing, not telling, and really being a true lab for the world, because we are the front lines in every stretch of the term.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I hope the storytelling will continue, though, because, boy, watching California's role in encouraging folks to go far has been so important, and it will continue to be. But you're right, we got to do it too. That's the most important thing. So
we can talk a lot. We can talk in the legislature. It's just that we've got to set to earn the spot at Glasgow. I think the legislature and his governor have to do some big things, and I don't think we've done that yet. I think we got to earn our spot on that stage. And, it's one thing to put budget in, but it's another to actually start to deliver, right? And so I don't want to pat ourselves on the back just yet. I think we've actually got to do a little more to be that leader we say we are.
Yeah, great. Super. Thank you. Chair Galiteva, you also have been a really important voice in California and globally on renewable energy. You lead the Cal ISO now, which has a lot of responsibility for keeping the lights on in the state and for making sure that the infrastructure works the way it's supposed to. About a month ago, there was a moment when the state was about 95% powered by renewable energy. It didn't last that long, but it was a signal that we're heading to a place that is really exciting. And so what investments made that possible? And what else do you need to do to try to make that a regular thing, if not 24/7, a normal thing a lot of the time?
Well, thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to LABC for organizing this wonderful event. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel as well. And yes, I'll have to say the ISO was able to reach exactly 94.5% of absolutely renewable energy penetration because our nuclear facility was down. So it was pure renewables. And during that time, we were also able to reach 85.7% of operation on just wind and solar. So it can be done with variable resources. The rest of it was hydro, which we, of course, don't consider to be necessarily part of our portfolio standard because renewables, only 30 megawatts and under in hydro production are part of the California RPS. But large hydro is renewable as well, and it also can support the grid and balance the grid. So investments in our grid infrastructure, investments in technology, investments in capabilities allowed us to reach that point. Horizontal integration with our next door neighbors and with like-minded states on the Pacific Northwest coast through the energy imbalance market is key. And of course, vertical integration of integrating technologies all the way behind the customer's meter also helps because we're able to harness the power of solar and the power of storage that customers have built on their own property. So that also helps balance the system. And being able to transmit that energy and ensure that we can keep it balanced at 60 hertz at all times. So what has helped us is an infrastructure of legislation that allowed us to invest in these technologies. It's very important for us to have SB 32 with the ambitious goals. It's very important for us to have SB 100, which requires the renewable portfolio standards. It's wonderful that California is dedicated to having electric vehicles be the only ones sold in California post 2035. That gives us visibility into the future and what we need to do in order to meet those ambitious state goals. And I'll have to say that we are the 5th largest economy in the world. So the 5th largest economy in the world being able to, albeit only for a few seconds, less than a minute, operate at 94.5% renewables means it can be done. And it's done on variable renewables, not just pure hydro, which is 24/7 and much more easier to operate. And I don't mean to insult the Pacific Northwest or Norway, but operating a grid on variable renewables is much more difficult. And we are on the front lines and able to do it. And California carries the torch proudly. We have a lot of work to do. We need to do this 24/7. Our most difficult period is the 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. timeframe when we need more capacity and we need more flexibility, and we need to be able to meet that with renewable resources. So what is that portfolio of the future going to look like is something we need to work on together. How do we ensure that we have more diversity in our renewable portfolio? It just cannot be solar-centric. We need wind. Offshore wind would be great. We need more hydro. Integration with the Pacific Northwest would be great, but keeping in mind climate change. Climate change might limit the access to that hydro. Then what's the fuel we can use? Because you are going to need fuels. We can't completely get off of gas. Is that going to be hydrogen? How do we ensure that it's green hydrogen? How do we make sure that we are prepared for that infrastructure to start coming online in an accelerated fashion, and that we do it equitably, and we, more importantly than all, have the jobs ready and the people trained to be able to step into that new reality and ensure that it happens. So it's a systems approach. We all need to work together. Certainly it's not within just the CAISO's jurisdiction. The old saying, think globally, act locally, is very, very true. So our example on how this can be done resonates around the world, and we're certainly looking forward to working with all our partners, both on the legislative side, on the regulatory side, and on the technical side to get it done. And you know what? We're confident that we can. And it's the ISOs, the grid operators of the world, that are actually taking charge and making that change possible. It wasn't the utilities who stepped up and said, hey, let's do 100% renewable energy. It was the law, but then it was also the ISO and the grid operators saying, oh yeah, we can do this. And, they got together in a cabal of Go 15, the 15 largest grid operators, charted a path forward, and we're getting it done.
That's awesome. Great. Is there a place in the world that California can learn from above and beyond? Is it Norway? Is it Germany? Is it
knowledge exchange is extremely important. So the Europeans are trying to launch, the single European market, where they have the capacity market and they try to have the price fixing mechanism, which is similar to our energy imbalance market, which is a voluntary market. And what we've seen is everybody wanting to interconnect to Norway, because Norway is the renewable energy battery of Europe. They have a lot of hydro. They actually have seasonal hydro where they pump for 6 months and then they discharge for 6 months. So Denmark going to and bragging about being 100%, wind-based or renewable, and talking about how great they are and how much more advanced they are than anybody else. And then you have the Norwegians going, if Denmark wanted to make coffee or watch their favorite shows in the evening because they have the duck curve like us, they couldn't do it without Norwegian hydro. So we're there to help. So yeah, we learn how integration and cooperation between states can help, and that certainly helps our energy imbalance market.
Great.
And it's helpful for everybody to be able to do that.
Great. Thanks.
We also learn from states within the United States. A regional integrated system helps. So if you're looking at Mid-America and you're looking at Iowa, Mid-American is a company that now operates on 100% renewable energy. It's owned by Warren Buffett. They're not the most environmental people on the face of this earth, but this was the lowest cost option for them. And it's the highest taxpayer with the 7th lowest prices in the United States. So we need to be humble when we're learning, but we also need to take stock of our leadership and our capabilities as well. So it's a multilateral process.
Great. Thank you, Angelina. It's amazing the coverage you have of the world and what's happening. So thanks for all of that. Dr. Pastor, you are one of the real leading voices globally in the United States and in California on how to do this in a way that brings all Californians and all people along. You've also recently, with others in the University of California system, put out a report called Accelerating the Timeline for Climate Action in California. It's a great report. There's a lot in it. But if you had to lift out a couple of things in a few minutes, given the shortness of time that we have, what are some of the priority recommendations in that report that you just released? Can't hear you. You're muted.
You'd think one would have figured this out after 18 months. Good to be with you. Good to be with LABC. And I feel like I'm the bookend to Senator Stern. He's got pictures of devastation. I've got pictures of job creation, which I think he was hinting at as well. And in this report, which you're right is, I hope as important as you think it is. I know that it's significant that it was a collaboration between USC and the University of California. That's a big thing. But we call for a number of specifics, all oriented around moving our carbon neutrality goals forward to 2030 instead of 2045. So since I direct something called the Equity Research Institute, what I want to lift up is those recommendations that focus in particular on equity, even as we're trying to achieve carbon neutrality. So for example, feed-in tariff, but making it more location specific so that if you're putting solar and creating solar jobs in low-income communities that have been disenfranchised, you're going to get first place on the feed-in tariff. Clean energy vehicles, glad to see the state moving forward on that. We need to start thinking about the used clean energy or electric vehicle market and how we put subsidies in there so we make sure that we're not passing on oil consuming clunkers into low-income communities, concentrating them there and creating essentially pollution hotspots as a result of upgrading part of our fleet. We need to accelerate on moving toward electrification of our trucking industry, particularly drayage trucking, short trucking, going from the ports to the warehouses of the Inland Empire. And we need to accelerate rapidly the electrification of buses. And it came up in your chat. We also need to recognize that it's not just fuel, but methane. That's a problem as well. And how do we reduce methane in the agricultural sector? How do we move toward a less meat-reliant diet and encouraging people to do that? The thing that I'm heartened about, and since I know what your next question is, Michael, I'll just go ahead and answer it. The thing that I'm heartened about is that as much as California has tried to lead on addressing climate change. It's also tried to, sometimes imperfectly, lead on climate equity. You know, the Biden administration is talking about Justice 40, which is making sure that 40% of its investments in climate actually go to disadvantaged communities. Where do you think they got that from? SB 535 and the way that we've been moving the funds from the cap and trade system into neighborhoods that were considered to be disadvantaged because of being environmentally overexposed and socially, economically vulnerable. And in fact, even though we mandated only about 35% of our investments to go to those communities, we've been getting to 40 and above, particularly through the Strategic Growth Council spending, which I was part of. And I think that's something that's really modeling something for the nation. And here's why it's important. Because as real as climate change is, so is the climate gap. So is the fact that the communities that are disproportionately exposed, not only to climate vulnerability, but to the co-pollutants that are associated with the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. Those are communities of color, low-income communities. And the climate gap is real in yet another way. And it's something I always love to bring up. When you look at the polling, and this is from the Public Policy Institute of California, and you ask Californians, do you think that global warming is a very serious problem that affects our quality of life and the economy? 50% of white Californians identify it as a very serious problem. 58% of Asian Californians identify it as a very serious problem. 60% of Black Californians identify it as a very serious problem, and 64% of Latino Californians identify it as a very serious problem. So climate equity is key to building the constituencies that we need to address climate change more generally, because this is a community, a set of communities that have experienced the worst aspects of climate change, the worst aspects of environmental pollution, and are very, very interested in the kind of legislation that Senator Stern has been proposing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. David, you are a developer of solar and storage projects in the US and around the world. You think a lot and talk a lot about the job creation potential of those projects. Can you just say a little bit about that framing and why you think it's important?
Well, I bring you greetings from Trump land. I'm out here in Ohio. I grew up in the Ohio River Valley. And I guess for those of you who think California is falling behind, I must represent some sort of, you can feel good that you're not nearly as far behind as we are in the state of Ohio. I come from a part of the country, I think it's serious to think about Trump land for a second, because I'm still doing projects, developing projects. Hecate Energy is developing projects in parts of the country where you don't really talk about clean energy. Clean energy is clean only by accident. And the only way we have permission to develop clean energy projects in this part of the country is through job creation. That's what we talk about, and that's the opportunity. I come from a part of the country that is very familiar with energy transitions. Energy transitions have been hell in the Ohio River Valley. Around the time of the Civil War, we were the iron manufacturing center of the country. We chopped down every tree we had to make charcoal to fuel those furnaces. Ultimately, the iron manufacturing went elsewhere, and we were left with environmental degradation, devastation. The jobs were gone. That was energy transition one. Then coal came around, and we were back in business. And every hillside, almost every hillside, it's amazing what the level of entrepreneurship was with coal in the region that I grew up in. We worked ourselves till we were sick. We polluted our streams. We did everything we could to help build this country. But then ultimately, coal fell out of favor. And energy transition too began for the people of the Ohio River Valley. And it was devastating, devastating. More recently, we were told there was going to be a natural gas boom, but that didn't really work out. So we have kind of this mini energy transition. Energy transitions have been hell for us. We have lost work. We have lost hope. We have turned to opiates. We have been seeing our environment desecrated. Excuse us if we are suspicious of another energy transition. So when I hear about energy equity, it's a really, really important subject for the people that I grew up around. There's an urban story when it comes to energy equity, but there's a rural story when it comes to energy equity, filled with Trump voters who have maybe become Trump voters because of failed energy transitions in the past. So why am I here? Why does this matter to California? Because you are part of the United States. Because you want to benefit from this $1 trillion energy infrastructure bill that is before the Congress right now, but doesn't seem to be moving. And one of the reasons it doesn't seem to be moving is that there are parts of the country, like the part of the country that I grew up in, where we've heard it before, energy transitions are hell. What is in this for us? So it is really incumbent upon those of us who are developing projects and care about renewable energy to do things a little bit differently this time, to remove the boom and bust. I spoke yesterday with the mayor of Cincinnati, John Cranley. Hecate Energy is developing a 100 megawatt solar project for the city of Cincinnati in an Appalachian, Ohio county, about 40 miles from Cincinnati, that literally went 4-1 for Donald Trump. Now, it is not easy to develop a utility scale solar project in a county that went 4-1 for Donald Trump. Just not the easiest thing. And Mayor Cranley went out to Highland County a couple of weeks ago for a groundbreaking for that project. And to tell you the truth, we were a little worried about that groundbreaking and how that would play out. But to the mayor's delight, and there are no Democrats, every county commissioner was in attendance. The farmers were there, labor union officials were there. Threat of protesters never materialized. Why? Jobs, money for schools, hope that simply doesn't exist in an area like that. I just spoke to one of the biggest Trump supporters in all of Appalachian, Ohio. He said, you know what? If they don't want it in Highland County, we'll take it here in Jackson County. There is anti-solar legislation that is currently making its way through the Ohio legislature. Anti-solar legislation designed to kill a lot of solar projects in the state. But there is now pushback from GOP mainstays like the Farm Bureau and the State Chamber of Commerce that has been pretty fierce, actually. So did all of these Ohio GOP bastions suddenly become clean energy ideologues? No, I assure you, they did not. But they have, and they have always been, and at least on this turn of events, they are being consistent in their support for economic development and job creation and an energy transition in which all of the people, the state of Ohio, might have a stake. So I guess that's why I'm here. I'm here to represent a part of the country that is way behind you, that is fighting to be part of this thing. And job creation is that thing that allows us to move forward.
David, my next question may be just a rhetorical at this point, but you've got tremendous political experience at the federal and state level. You've helped elect a whole bunch of candidates, including Clinton and Biden and Daley and so on. And you were committee chair of the National Democratic Party. So all of that's interesting given the context you just described. I mean, what counsel would you offer the Congress and Biden on how to move forward with their infrastructure bill? What it's just sort of a couple of, we don't have any time, but quickly, what is a recommendation or two that you would give them that would help them get this giant infrastructure vision that they've got moved effectively through the Congress?
Well, I mean, their problem isn't one of messaging. It's the fact that people haven't seen it yet in their lives.
Right.
They don't believe it.
We need
yet.
examples. Yeah.
I think they're doing everything exactly right. They're lifting up energy equity. They're lifting up domestic content. They're lifting up fair labor standards. They're doing everything right from a messaging standpoint. It's just that vast parts of the country haven't seen it yet.
Right.
Those of us in Ohio, they're coming along. I guess that was the point of my whole discussion. They will come, but they've got to see it first, because the history of energy transitions, not good.
Yeah.
Not really all that positive. So I think he's doing everything exactly right. And every day we need to lift up that messaging related to inclusion, equity, fair labor standards, domestic content. When we do, we'll ultimately succeed. The question is, does he have time?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. So great. So great to get the non-bi-coastal perspective here. Really appreciate it. So I've got a couple more questions that are kind of aimed at all of you, but I don't think we have time for everybody to answer each question. So there's a little bit of hope that you'll sort of self-select here. First, we've been through this period with an administration that did everything it could to distance itself from climate change. In fact, to really retard progress in this space. It was bad, not good for climate. But the silver lining was that states and cities and companies stood up and said, hey, that's not the US. We're still in globe, keep working on this stuff. We'll get back to you after we change administrations and get somebody reasonable in there in the White House. That was a big deal. Not only was it a political voice that was important to build, but it was also kind of practical. You saw a lot of folks step up with their ambition and work and attempted to kind of work together, even though they didn't have the federal government. What do we do now that we've shifted to a federal leadership role on this issue? How do these so-called, we call them subnationals. Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, says they're not subnationals, they're supranationals. So in Jay's phrasing, how do supranationals keep doing good work in this space? Do they just blink off and let the Biden administration do, or what do they need to do? Anybody want to throw in a word on that?
Start moving markets, start moving capital, getting private capital moving in the right direction. We've been pushing on our major banking institutions, for instance, to look at energy and climate and equity and how they're moving funding and grid integration, being able to sell renewable power into the largest demand market in the country, being the largest, renewable gas market in the country. Pennsylvania is selling us their fuel. Texas is selling us low carbon fuel from Port of Galveston all the way out here in Louisiana. Being a market, right? And lifting it, and don't hype it too much either. To the very poignant points from a friend from Ohio there. we don't need to wave our flag at it. Let's just deliver.
Yeah. Anybody else want to say anything?
And showcase that it can be done, and that this is the lowest cost, highest value path forward for all, from a climate perspective, from a human perspective, from a water perspective. I think the silver lining, as you said, with the Trump administration was the fact that California went all in. And California started the Under 2 MOU initiative and kind of corralled together the subnationals to say, look, if the national leadership fails us, we can go at it on a subnational level, on a state level, on a city level, and show that it can be done, because the cost of renewables is now much lower. The cost of solar has fallen by over 97% in the last 10 years. The cost of wind has fallen by over 50%. The cost of batteries by over 87%. The cost of electric vehicles is falling as well. And we made that happen. And even in a Trump administration, we were able to get the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, chaired by a person from Mitch McConnell's office, to turn down the ask that nuclear and coal were considered essential for resiliency, and say, no, markets can operate in its renewables and storage. And actually, Order 2222 from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission took the initiative from California, where we said we wanted to provide a market for behind the meter technologies owned by customers to provide support to the grid. And that actually happened. It's now a national law. So there were some positive things that happened, I think, because the Trump administration wasn't paying attention. So we were able to play in the background, but also because of our leadership in the energy imbalance market. You've got states now throughout the West with 100% renewable energy portfolio standards following California's lead, not because they ideologically believe what we want, but as David pointed out, it's jobs, it's economic development, it's the lowest cost path forward, the highest value path forward. It mitigates climate change. Renewables have no impact on water resources. They preserve the water resources. The largest user of freshwater resources, which is going to be our next crisis, is the fossil industry. So we need to be cognizant of that fact as well, and always bring it into the narrative. Some positive things did happen. I think just people being ambitious and saying, no, we are not going down this path. We're staying firmly on the renewables path, and making sure that you don't have a boom and bust situation, which we've seen happen before, not only in the renewable space, but also in the fossil space, is key. And able to ride through administrations and ensures the longevity.
Any suggestions on what the Biden administration could do to make sure that this super national leadership continues in a big way? David, you may have been trying to answer the other thing, but
I was just going to make a quick point, which is, thank God for the subnationals.
Thank God.
You're referring to the lower. Here's my experience: the lower the unit of government, the less ideological debates become.
Mm-hmm.
You can have people that at the national level will be fiercely anti-renewables or anti-clean energy. Same at the state level. But then you bring it down to their home county, their hometown, you could, the ideology goes away, and there can be real conversations about the kinds of projects from which their people will benefit.
Yeah.
So,
good point.
when I saw that, I think, look, it's good to have the wind at our back as an industry, as a, the clean energy mission. Thank God we have the wind at our back. But we didn't for the last 4 years, and yet the mayor of Cincinnati didn't wait. Walmart didn't wait.
Mm-hmm.
The Hickory Nation, where we're working, didn't work. Google didn't wait.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of stuff got done that was able to get done at a less ideological way.
I think it'll be easy for the Biden administration to just say, hey, we've got this now, and go, and miss the opportunity to continue to encourage super national action. So I hope that they get on that soon, because it's too easy to stay in your silo. And
I might make a comment on that. I think.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
I think we forget that, for example, a lot of the elements that became the New Deal actually rose from state experimentation, stuff at a local level, then bubbled up to national policy. And one of the things we should be clear about is that the last 4 years of state level experimentation was because the Trump administration was trying to stop state level experimentation, was trying to muzzle the ability to innovate in this industry and create new and more equitable and more efficient alternatives in the hopes of preserving the old rather than figuring out where the new might be. I think one of the risks right now is if people say, I think David's right, it's good to have the wind. I love that because of wind energy too. It's good to have the wind at our back, but we should not use that as an excuse to not continue to lead and experiment and be more aggressive at a state level. And that is exactly why, getting back to the first question you asked me, why we wrote that paper about accelerating the timeline in California. No matter what the Biden administration does, given the balance of national politics, its ability to move forward as aggressively as California could, it's going to be limited because it's got Ohio as well as California in determining what the federal mix will look like. But we should not say, because things will look a little bit better in DC, that California should relax. In fact, California should accelerate, innovate, and begin to demonstrate, which is, I think, what Angelina was talking about.
100% agree. Absolutely right.
Yes, and if you want a specific suggestion
Yes.
for the infrastructure funds, then, start building a national grid. Because if we do have a national grid, we can move the power around and we can ensure that California sunshine can reach all the way up to New York. And wind from the East Coast can come down to California, and wind from the Midwest can go everywhere. So a national grid is key for us to be able to reach 100% renewable energy on a national level.
Great. Yeah, I've got another question. I'm going to ask
Texas
you.
will be all on its own.
Yeah, Texas might separate. Yeah. Manuel and Henry, you both talked about electric vehicles. Last September, during what we now call Climate Week, which is the week that the UN General Assembly meets, Governor Newsom made a big announcement about the state being only allowing sale of electric vehicles in 2045. Great announcement, one of the first sort of concrete commitments like that anywhere in the world. I think you both might think that that's not soon enough, and I just wanted to ask you if that was true, and also how we do it faster.
Senator.
I do think it's not going to be enough, but if we do it alone, it's really insufficient as it is. I mean, for our own local air quality, we're in a crisis right now. From a respiratory perspective, we've had COVID, wildfire smoke permanently damaging lungs, and then on top of that, the most persistent smog and PM and black carbon problem in the country, in Los Angeles and Oakland and other areas. So no, we got to go faster, but it's also because we just can't. The middle class and working class can't afford it. The average family making $80,000 a year in California, they're spending more on their vehicle and on transportation than they are on food and healthcare combined. So we can't afford to go that slow, just because when you're filling up at the tank as opposed to plugging in, you're spending 3 times as much, right? So the middle class won't actually be able to thrive in this state until we can break this energy trap that the old internal combustion engine really is just a lag on that upward mobility.
Great, thanks. Dr. Pastor?
Well, as the proud owner of an electric vehicle myself, a Chevy Bolt, I decided to go modest. The Tesla is a little ostentatious for someone who's a social justice activist. I felt really enthusiastic about the announcement. I agree with the senator that it should be a lot more assertive and aggressive, and I hopefully will move faster. But one of the things that I thought was very interesting about that announcement was that it included all these elements around equity in terms of job creation, in terms of thinking about secondary markets for used cars, and a number of other things. And what I felt heartened about on that Earth Day was that we were moving forward and that we were wedding equity and environmental sustainability together. We often talk about a just transition, where we're thinking about how do we move to a clean energy future in a just way. I'd like to say that particularly after this year, we need to think about moving to a transition to justice. If we center the communities that have been left behind, we will be aggressive about cleaning up the environment. If we try to figure out who got disenfranchised and left vulnerable as a result of COVID, we'll have a better public health system. If we lift up the bottom of the labor market and deliver jobs to people who have long been shut out of labor markets, we're going to solve so many social problems and help to educate the next generation. We've been talking about a just transition. After this last year of the COVID crisis, the racial reckoning, etc., we need to start talking about a transition to justice. When we center equity, a lot of other good things will flow.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Angelina, you said, another question. Angelina, you said quite a bit about grids so far, but I wanted to ask you, what comes next on grid investments in California? But I wanted to do it also in the context of the recent announcement, another very exciting announcement by the state that it would begin to get into the offshore wind game. And there was an announcement that something over 4,000 megawatts would be committed to by the state. And I see that as a down payment, just a beginning. East Coast is already committed to 30,000 megawatts and wants to go way beyond that. I think that horse is out of that barn. It really is starting to move, which is exciting. But if California moves forward on offshore wind, there is a significant grid infrastructure need. Could you just say a little bit about that and how that happens?
It's wonderful to be looking at offshore wind. We hadn't been able to do it for a while, although we really wanted to, because the profile of offshore wind is really beneficial. It kicks in exactly during that 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. delta, where we need to be able to allow for ramping resources and flexibility on the grid. So it complements the solar. As the sun goes down, the wind picks up. Our issue had always been the coast of California is pretty deep. So we needed to have floating platforms, and the industry needed to come up with the floating platforms that can actually be installed off the California coast. Actually, the infrastructure isn't that bad off the California coast. Once you have the cable, and the cabling is pretty well known to come to the coast, they can integrate directly into what is now Diablo Canyon, the nuclear power station that already has the infrastructure that can push the power to the rest of the state and beyond. So starting in that territory and integrating into a facility that already has the availability of 2,000 megawatts and more of capacity of power to just take it from the coast, that's tremendous. So we can do that. And then, of course, we can have infrastructure running up and down as necessary, but we're pretty well interconnected from north to south. And should be able to push that power. And of course, the Canadians are very interested in collaborating on the development of offshore wind with California. And I think if we pull together, it always, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And working with partners is always a good undertaking to have. And as I said, a national grid, investments in a national grid would also be key, because that would allow the transition to 100% for all of the United States in a much more systematic way and in a much more pragmatic way. But also the integration and capabilities of monetizing technologies that customers are investing in anyway right now, whether it's an electric vehicle, whether it's a storage technology, whether it's solar on your rooftop, being able to aggregate that and participate in the marketplace in a way that monetizes those assets to you as a customer. Not even, they used to be ratepayers, then they became customers, and now consumers, and now prosumers, because they're able to produce energy. Harnessing that technology effectively is also key, because it brings in the community, and it also brings in the jobs. California also has the objective and the mandate to install solar on all new construction starting in 2020, right, with residential and then industrial and commercial to 25 and 2030. That's jobs, that's boots on the ground, that's infrastructure, that's development. So on the one hand, your system is very diversified and it's very distributed. And on the other hand, it's also centralized with a backbone grid. So those two kind of dichotomies working together allow us to become much more resilient as well, and much more flexible. And I think renewables require that. We can do it.
Thank you. David, you're a developer. You see this need all the time. What, from your perspective, what do we need to do?
Well, I was just going to say, and Hecate Energy is starting to get into offshore wind. We just announced our first mega project off the coast of Iceland, serving the United Kingdom, if all goes well. But I was just going to make, maybe this is an obvious point, but one of the great geopolitical advantages that our country has always benefited from is the fact that we have these two great seashores, ocean fronts, on the eastern part of our country and the western part of our country. Our growth, our strength, our national security strength is inextricably linked to that geopolitical fact. Russia wishes they had the kind of oceanfront resource that we have. Germany wishes they had it. We have it. So just as we have oil and gas resources that are a point of jealousy around the world, I suppose, the fact that we have these ocean fronts, the fact that we have this capacity to develop offshore wind, the fact that offshore wind is sort of it's almost nuclear power without the uranium. I mean, it's such a big piece of this, and we have the natural resource, the geopolitical advantage that the rest of the world just wishes it had.
Yeah. Now the East Coast is very bullish on this, and we talk regularly about 200 gigawatts, 200,000 megawatts of wind from offshore that would basically make the Atlantic coast carbon neutral. We'd be carbon exporters in addition. It's really exciting. So I hope California thinks bigger than 4 gigawatts, because I think there's much more potential. You've got some conflicts with the DoD and the fishing industry and all kinds of folks, but hopefully those can get resolved and you can go way bigger than that. It'll really matter if you can. So the last open-ended question, but I think Manuel, it's directed at you to a large degree. It's back on the critical, important issue of equity and just transition. As you think about that in California, have you found good examples that California can draw on, or is California the one and only leader? Where are you going for guidance on just transition issues for California?
Well, actually, California is a leader in this issue. We have a new report coming out called Just Transition / Transition to Justice, in which we're actually looking at 4 different states. There's a really interesting effort in New York Renews, which has put equity into the mix. There's some stuff that's going on in Washington with the creation of its new carbon markets that is trying to fix some of the problems that many of us have seen with the cap and trade system within California about not pricing in co-pollutants or being concerned about those kind of issues. We actually also look at Louisiana and Kentucky, places that are a little bit more like Ohio in terms of their politics. And there you actually find a point that David made, which is that the lower you go, when you go to the level of a city, you find a lot of willingness to deal with some of the energy issues. And you actually see some stuff in, Mitch McConnell's state around the idea that the Commonwealth needs to be more sustainable for its people, and that's going to require moving off coal. So I do think that there's a little bit to see in the rest of the state, but I think the thought that I would leave everyone with is that equity needs to be baked in, not sprinkled on. It needs to be something that we think about at the beginning, and not something where we design our carbon market and go, oops, what do we need to do to make it fair? It's not where we say, how are we going to create jobs? Oh, wait a minute, what about the communities that, David, have either lost their jobs in these previous transitions or might now, or have long been suffering from pollution and being on the front lines? How do they get in early to build the kind of political coalitions that are going to be necessary? Putting equity first. We've been trained in the United States to think of it as just distribution, to think of it as sort of an afterthought. We need to start centering it. Our research shows regions that are more equitable in terms of income distribution, that are less residentially segregated and less politically fragmented, are able to sustain employment growth better over time. This is part of how we move forward.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to say a word about that?
I'll throw in my hope for California from here in Ohio. And that is, I think that it would be easy for even those of us in the renewable energy business to go down a path of the lowest common denominator. It's not that hard to go there. I mean, we can make price be the end all be all, and job creation won't happen, and equity won't happen. My hope for California will that you will lead the way for the rest of the country when it comes to these standards, these aspirations, that when it comes to energy equity, the job creation, domestic content, fair labor standards, that will, as Dr. Pastor has stated, be baked in. That will be part of the process, so that those of us who live in places like Ohio will ultimately benefit from that view, deploy that strategy, and have our own people benefit from a renewable energy strategy. And that's my hope for California.
Henry?
That's wonderful. And I think that
Amen.
that leadership, yes, that leadership can also be taken on a global scale, because if we're here creating opportunities and we have it baked in, not sprinkled on top, and this empowers girls and it empowers women and it provides a pathway for education. This is how we leapfrog the world, the third world, the developing world. This is how we leapfrog the countries in transition, such as Bulgaria, where I come from, where I was on a conference a couple of days ago, and people just say, renewables are too expensive. Renewables are only for the elite nations. Renewables are for California and the United States. Here on the ground, we can't afford to have renewables. We're developing lignite. And that is where the story needs to go as well, in terms of let's develop renewables. It's the AES company that developed lignite in Europe. Maybe AES can bring some solar, some equity, some jobs, and not just jobs in the green area, but careers and a pathway for development, so that young people see this as what they need to do to step in, so that a poor girl in Africa, as we're bringing in distributed generation and islanding out territories that would never see solar, or they will never see energy for 20 years because only 20% of the continent is electrified, have access to education, have access to industry, and have access to an opportunity to have a dignified life. It is important for us to do this, not just for California, not just for the US. We have a global responsibility too.
Senator, last word on just transition equity?
I mean, I would say to Dr. Pastor's point, you know, it would help to have a rock solid healthcare system and a solution to the housing crisis, and these sort of and a solid pre-K all the way through college affordable education system, and then all these other pieces start to fall in place a lot differently if people aren't just employer based in their healthcare. The other thing I would say though is, you know, looking at countries like Germany or looking at Scandinavia, right? That safety net's there, so they're more durable. The labor markets are less in flux. There's less those catastrophic moments. But also, you know, I don't talk about just transition when I walk into a union hall with pipe fitters who are working in the oil and gas industry. I don't say, hey, you know what, we're going to have a great job for you in the future. It's going to be, you're going to work in IT, or we're going to train you on, you know, you're going to leave your profession, basically, you spent 30 years working on, and you're going to learn something brand new. I think we've got to reframe our thinking and not be that arrogant when we walk into those rooms. I think there's plenty of pipe fitting work to be done. I think there's plenty of electrical work to be done. You know, when you think of an iron worker, we've got a lot of infrastructure to build, and it's not even outside of the oil and gas sector necessarily, right? Like you think about 3,500 orphan wells in California, many of which are sitting here in LA County. That's thousands and thousands of jobs that we need actual oil and gas workers to go do to help clean up these neighborhoods and help themselves. And we can do that with union work. So I really think we need to reframe our thinking, and not say, like, it's the end of your career, think of something new, as opposed to, no, there's plenty to do in these legacy industries of work that actually has to get done. And I think we can start to rearrange our politics that way too.
Yeah. And to David's point, we have to just show it, prove it, so that people get excited about real opportunities, not hypothetical ones. Yeah, no, thanks. That's great. So we have the luxury of, a little bit of time to ask you one final question each. And that is really, of all the things we've talked about and thought about, what's the biggest opportunity you think we have in the next 5 years to accelerate our climate goals to the place where they need to be?
Well,
How many gigawatts, Angelina? I mean, I just think, with all the transitions we're having right now and the complexities of, do we keep all our one through cooling and all our gas systems online in the future beyond Diablo? I think we do a massive electricity build out here that's going to be very exciting, especially if we do things like buy down utility debt for the lowest income consumers and make sure that the markets have sort of price durability, that we're not going to hurt folks on the bottom. But, I also think we can go build, we can go blow through our ZEV goals right now and become Lithium Valley and make our own batteries here in California and not have to bring, cobalt and lithium over from Africa or from foreign markets, and, start driving those F-150s. I certainly want one. So, I think between the 250,000 public EV chargers that I think we can get done, and then multi-gigawatt build out on power, there's a lot. But like the one I mentioned earlier, if we can go close the 3,000 most dangerous wells in California and do that in communities and start to go right at the heart of that issue, but not with bumper sticker politics, not with ban this versus ban that, and things that Pennsylvania or Ohio are going to say they're crazy, but just go do real work and clean up communities and make them better with union labor. I don't know. I think that changes the conversation.
So briefly, two things. One is, I think the Senator would be glad to know that our accelerating the timeline report actually called for leak-free pipes and all the oil with sealing the orphan wells that you were talking about. And you're right, that's fantastic for people who've got a particular set of skills that are going to be easily redeployed to doing that. And it's exactly the same kind of work that they were doing. In response to your question, Michael, let me give you an unfair answer. And that is the following. Every time everybody asks me, what is the single thing you would do? I always say, I would stop thinking that there's one single thing. If we're going to address this climate crisis, it's going to be in a multiplicity of different fronts. And we're going to have to do, even the senator, when asked about a single opportunity, I think you named about 20, actually. So I think one of the things we need to realize is that we're going to need to, and I guess I shouldn't use this because it's an internal combustion engine metaphor, but we're going to need to fire on all cylinders going forward as we move into a clean energy future.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's no silver bullet, right? Lots of silver buckshot. We got to move on all of it. So, David, Angelina?
I'll let David go.
Well, I just say we have a chance for a different kind of energy transition, not the energy transitions of the past that have left communities behind, that have been erased to the bottom, but to an energy transition that brings about a transition to clean energy that lifts, the various parties, people from all across the country and from all neighborhoods. That is the opportunity we have to get it right. And even if we don't get it exactly right, we can get it more right than has ever been the case before. And I guess I congratulate this conference and this panel for elevating those issues.
Thank you, David. Angelina?
Right. The future is decarbonized, diversified, distributed, digitized, and democratized. Everybody needs to participate and bring down the silos. Energy is everywhere now. Electricity is everywhere now. It's in the building sector, it's in the transportation sector, and it's in the fuel sector. And for us to get to those last 5% 24/7, we need to be thinking not only how we integrate with our partners, but also how do we bring in the storage that is necessary for us to be able to operate not only every day, but in instances where you may not have enough sunlight or you may not have enough wind. We also need to figure out how we're decarbonizing our shipping and our aviation. And that is also storage. Is it going to be some kind of a fuel? What is that fuel? How do we make the fuel? So thinking about those next steps that are going to allow us and enable us to truly get to 100% of decarbonizing the economy all around as we lift everybody up and point to the fact that, yes, there are jobs. And this transition leads to cleaner air and cleaner water, better economic development, and a better future for all of us on this planet, because let's face it, we don't have a planet B yet.
Thank you all for ranging across an incredible array of issues, concerns, and realities and future visions. I'm always struck when I participate in these LABC summits just how special and creative California is, and also just how marvelous the LABC is in putting on these kinds of comprehensive summits. So thanks to Nadine and Mary Leslie and Adam Lane and Rachel Levy and the rest of the LABC staff who've done this so well. There's just no doubt California has to keep playing this role it's been playing. And you just see the creativity and the energy across the board in California and this group and all the other folks across the agenda that's coming up today, which is so rich and interesting and so valuable, because I think it really gives us some hope, but also some real specific and realistic pointers about where to turn and where to go and how to do it. So, again, just thank you, California, for all you're doing. And I know we all are going to continue to depend on you going forward, looking forward to the next leapfrogs that are coming and your commitments and ambition as you go forward. And we're all going to keep learning from you about how to do this. So anyway, but thank you all so much. Have a great day. We may even have ended a couple minutes early, which is a shock. And it may mean that the audience has a minute to go get a cup of coffee before the next set of panels, but I think we'll hand it over, and everyone in the audience should wait for a second to get directions about how we're going to take this forward. But anyway, thank you again very much, and thank you, LABC. Take care, everyone. See ya.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Thanks, Michael.
See ya.
Thanks.